Yeah, it's probably not as big an issue as you think it is.
Okay, it's 3:30 and I'm going to call the meeting to order and ask Acting Secretary Paul Keith to call the roll.
Brew. Present. Curtis. Gilbert.
Present.
Hightower.
Present.
Odell. Present. Salger. Present. Sharma.
Present.
Simmons.
Here.
Tedrick.
Present.
Quorum is established.
There will be a public questions and comments portion available at today's meeting. The last up to 15 minutes total, 3 minutes per speaker. Are there any persons who wish to speak today?
Do not have any speakers.
No speakers. I think tomorrow we do have a speaker. Correct. Okay, the Board of Trustee meeting schedule is on the agenda for a vote during tomorrow's meeting. Is there any discussion about any changes needed to that item? I think one of the changes we made were meeting at the East St. Louis facility, SIU East St. Louis facility. In February
September.
or September.
Yeah, this meeting next year will be in.
This meeting next week will be in East St. Louis. Any other discussion about the schedule for next year? Okay, the next item is the Ohio Valley Conference Certification Form for SIU Edwardsville, which is presented to the board annually and signed by the chair. A copy of this form was sent to the board members ahead of this meeting. Are there any questions about this item? I think I've already signed it. Yes, I've already signed it. Okay, the next item is the FY 2023 operating budget discussion. President Mahoney, will you introduce this item?
Yeah, and I'll just remind the board, last year we changed a little bit of how we present this. So this year we're going to focus on both presenting the overall budget, which we've always done, but adding in on the second page of each institution's packet is a comparison of what they budgeted, what actually happened last year, and then what they're budgeting for the next year, and then what they plan on changing in the next year is on the third page. So I thought that's a better way of presenting that. We're going to go in the order that it's in the packet. So I'll start first with Chancellor Lane and Carbondale.
Thank you, President Mahoney and Mr. Chairman. All trustees, thank you again, and we'll kick off. I want to thank Julie McReynolds. She actually is on the Zoom there, but Julie has done a fantastic job. She's been our interim CFO for the last, probably feels like 10 years for her, but it's probably been about a year or so. So she's been here for several years. She does a fantastic job. Again, thanks for giving me the opportunity to present the fiscal year 2023 budget for the Carbondale campus. I'll focus really on table A in your packet, so you'll get a sense of where I am in that packet. Our total operating budget is approximately $355 million. That's an increase of $2 million from last year. Almost half of the total budget is funded by two sources: our state appropriations and our tuition revenues. We're grateful. It's important to point out we're grateful once again for the support, continued support of higher education from the governor and our legislators, and we really appreciate that. They gave us a supplemental appropriation fiscal year 2022, which was very helpful and obviously increased the budget for higher ed in 2023. So that stability in the state appropriation, as you know, is critical to our financial planning going forward. We budgeted flat tuition revenues. For us, that's good news if you think about what our tuition revenues have been throughout the years. And so we're actually pretty happy about being able to budget a flat tuition revenue. As you know, our campus shared some positive news earlier this month regarding enrollment, the third year in a row of increasing numbers in our freshman class. So that's very positive signs for us in going up in those numbers. We saw an increase of nearly 7% in our first-time college student cohort. Again, all that contributes to our tuition revenue and what we're trying to do there. Overall enrollment essentially flat as compared to the previous year. A lot of plans underway and in place to really grow that overall number. Renewed focus on retention this year, which we think will help us going forward. As you know, we're not unique. There are other universities around us that have had some issues there with enrollment, but I think most of us are going to be able to come out okay as we keep charging forward. Another large area of the budget is the revenue bond operations. That's the largest operation in this fund group. It's student housing is the largest piece there. It's an annual expense budget of 23 million. It's about half the entire budget for this particular group. We also shared some more good news. We saw a 4.6% increase in our housing, on-campus housing contract. So as you know, that number increasing, it gives us the ability to do some things at the end of the fiscal year with some deferred maintenance in the residential facilities and to be able to do some creative things there to make sure students want to stay on campus. So we're really excited about that. Regarding the self-supporting fund group section, I should note that the negative balance is primarily driven by the long-term deficits accumulated by athletics over the last 2 decades. Pleased to report, though, we've done a lot of change, a lot of movement inside of that athletic department to get some of that spending and those things fully under control. We'll continue on that path. We've got a brand new AD that's in there. He's going to do a great job there, but we've got a system that's in place now that we think really is working, and it's looking a lot better than it did a couple of years ago. So we're going to continue on that track in that respect. For the second document that you have, it's a comparison of fiscal year 2022 budget and the actuals in the fiscal year 2023 budget. The income fund revenue was right on track with our projection. So again, I have to thank our folks in the financial office for doing a really good job on that projection. However, our projected ending cash for the income fund was not where we had budgeted because we provided units across the campus relief from last year's payback. And as you know, in that financial sustainability plan, 2017, I think is the date, our payback is about $5.4 million a year. And so we have been paying that on time. And
How long does that last?
that lasts luckily until 2024. So at the end of 2024, it will be done. And so we're celebrating that early, but we still have some work to do, but we can't wait until that is done because we can do some things across campus that I think will really help us in going forward. So we'll continue to work and be diligent in that particular area. And we're going to hold true to the plan that was approved here by the board. We believe that we will be able to achieve the planned ending cash balance as listed for fiscal year 2023. The biggest changes that you'll see this year in this particular budget, and that's the last document that you have, this demonstrates expected changes in the general operating income and expenses. This additional appropriation that we received in our state appropriation will allow us to request a 2% salary increase for all employees, with the increases for represented employees being bargained consistent with the terms of each collective bargaining agreement. Preliminary assessments of tuition revenue show that we will meet or exceed our income fund budget this year. So again, a 2% across the board is what we're proposing for this upcoming year to be effective in July. We think that's definitely something that's needed for our campus. We've had a few years of non-increases, and so this will at least put us on the pathway to getting a little closer to where we want to be. And that concludes my report.
Questions for Chancellor Wayne?
I have one question on the 2%. And you believe that will get it done? You guys just budgeted this amount.
Yeah, that amount, that at least will give us an opportunity. It won't get us done in terms of where we need to be as compared to where our folks are with the market.
Right.
But if you look throughout the years, our increases, we've gone about several years without. So this will at least, the second year now, at least since I've been able to give us an opportunity to continue to grow that amount for our faculty and our staff that are there. And as you probably know, earlier this year, we did some adjustments based on internal equity where we were able to reallocate some funds to be able to help some employees that were stuck in some salary compression.
Shabazz, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. Based on the contracts, are there commitments made for next fiscal year or raises to faculty and staff
First part of that, trustee?
based on the contract.
Yes.
Okay,
Those that are, we've already negotiated with our faculty unions, and we've got them set for the next, if I'm not mistaken, 3 years.
3 years, okay.
Yeah, and then they do share, if our tuition revenue moves up, they actually share in some of that if we see that change in our tuition revenue profile.
Okay.
So there's another incentive in there to go up even more
Nice.
with enrollment.
Good, thank you.
Any other questions for Chancellor Lane? Before we move on, I just wanted to note, and this will be something I will mention with some of the other budgets. If you go to that second table, or Carmen, one of the things I really want to note, and this is a credit to each of the campuses, is really controlling expenditures compared to budget. Is you will see as a common theme, and in some cases in the income fund fairly modest, but if you look at revenue bond operations and expenditures and self-supporting, a pretty significant difference between what was budgeted and what actually happened. And again, a lot of credit goes to the way that things were managed. So while we're certainly very thankful for the state appropriation increase, some of the better financial performance is based on decisions that were made at campus level and controlling expenditures. And that's a pretty significant difference, which again is one of the reasons I wanted you all to see the actuals on an annual basis, because you see what actually does happen. And sometimes it's very different. Right. If there's no other questions for Chancellor Lane, we'll move on to Dean Cruz.
Thank you very much. I'll also focus mainly on table A for the School of Medicine. If you'll get that one out, I'll go briefly through each one of those columns on table A. Appropriated funds reflects the 5% increase of $1.7 million. It also includes the special overhead and maintenance that we get every year for the Simmons Cancer Institute. And you'll see that expended under other expenses there. We frequently get that question, what that is. The second line, income funds, is mainly to tuition and fees and reflects a 1.75% increase in tuition, plus increases for 8 new Lincoln Scholars students and the new students in the Doctor of Medical Science program. All of the expenditures are educationally related expenses in that column. Grants and contracts, if you compare to the previous year, the third column, it's down a bit because we're not going to be getting some of the state grants for COVID-19 because we've moved into the stable phase. Indirect cost recoveries, the next line, that's our, we call it local funds. And it's intergovernmental transfers and indirects from research, facilities and administration. You see, usually the income fund and indirect cost recovery, we do a lot of balancing between those two with their various carryovers from year to year. And we're trying to get things in line from the pandemic. You see a surplus in one and a deficit in the other one. They kind of cancel each other out. The last two are the biggest numbers, and they're related to the clinical operations. So revenue bond operations are all 504 accounts from the clinical practice, SIU Medicine, that SIU Medicine reimburses the School of Medicine for. By and large, it's rent and staff. And it does reflect 32% growth in our clinical activity over the past 2 years. That's happened because of a variety of reasons, which also is reflected in the last column, self-supporting activities, which is our sponsoring hospital support. All of our federally qualified health center activity, all 15 sites are budgeted here, and the Office of Correctional Medicine, all of them growing significantly. So the entire budget is $285 million, and we budgeted just a very slight surplus of $365,000. On SOM2, the next page, the comparison to the previous year, I mentioned, most of what's happening there. The grants are down because of COVID-19, and the last two are up significantly because of the increased clinical activity and the expected continued increase in clinical activity and clinical income on those years. And SOM3 is how we will spend the tuition increase and 5% increase in the state appropriation. We also will ask for a 2% increase in salaries for everyone except faculty members who have a clinical practice. We don't ask for it.
They get paid from the practice.
What?
They get paid from the practice.
They do. It's kind of a funny system that we have. Their base salaries, most of the bulk of that is covered by hospital partners. None of it is really covered, very little by state appropriations. And so we generally go for market increases periodically with the hospitals rather than any across the board amounts. It probably needs to be fixed. It's a little complicated. Really.
Dean Cruz, what, under new commitments, what is business intelligence unit staffing?
Oh, yeah. So we've consolidated some of our business intelligence, and we actually are hiring some other people for that as well. BI is something that's absolutely essential for clinical practices of the future, also for our equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts. So that 200,000 is for two new positions, and the other than salary that goes with that, again, to focus on the business intelligence computing that's needed for the clinical practice. And we're going to use some of the grants that we have from Blue Cross Blue Shield and Meridian insurance companies to really go down the road of getting all of the data we need to make the right decisions about equity and anti-racism.
Any other questions for Dean Cruz? On the chance for mine.
All right. Well, good morning again, everyone. Thank you, President Mahoney. Before I begin the presentation, I too want to thank SIU's Budget Director, Bill Winter, who is here. Most of you know, this is my first opportunity to really inspect the SIU budget and set a course for FY23. Bill and his team have been very patient with my questions and my requests. So I wanted to thank him publicly, and also our marketing members from our marketing and communications team have been really working hard to help us as leaders in the institution translate some of the budget details and processes to our university community. And that is a matter of effective communication, taking these budget details and translating them for the university community. So I appreciate the opportunity to share just a few details about our FY23 budget. But before I outline the details, let me just convey to you my confidence that SIUE is preparing for a strong financial future. Recently, we have undergone budget process and structure assessments, identified new strategies for cost savings and new revenue streams, and we're actively aligning our resources with our priorities. For context, if you look at our FY23 budget on the first table, most of the budget categories may be fairly straightforward or self-explanatory. Your eyes may be drawn to the line of planned operating results showing a $4.7 million deficit, in which we're utilizing cash accounts for specific needs. I'll talk a little bit about that later. We added expenses associated with COVID-19 and the corresponding challenges, as well as the experienced deficit spending last year. With all that said, we were able to balance the FY22 budget by leveraging one-time funding from the HERF dollars you heard Dean Cruz talk about, and the 5% supplement from the state, which was very helpful. Table 2, where you see the budget and actual expenditures along with the FY23 budget. SIU was able to achieve a balanced budget for FY22, and that's a really big deal in my view. What likely stands out in this document is the grants and contracts section, where you see a pretty significant increase. And this is due again to the infusion of one-time resources associated with the HERF dollars, Higher Education Emergency Relief Fund, which won't be available to us in FY23 and going forward.
And is that the COVID?
Yes,
money?
yes, yes. Without this funding, there are some structural challenges in the SIUE budget that were exposed once you take those one-time dollars away, contributing to what we're referring to as a structural deficit, for which our FY23 plan is designed to address. You may notice that our FY23 budget includes a $3.2 million increase, again, from the state appropriations. This line specifically was not from the supplement, but associated with SIUE's launch of new academic programs, a research center, and an Institute for Community Justice and Racial Equity at the Southwestern Illinois Center for Justice and Workforce, which we celebrated with the governor last month. Certainly, this is an incredible addition to our budget still. This FY23 budget offers an opportunity to reset and realign for the future. Let me move quickly to table 3. When I arrived in March, it was very clear to me that we would need to develop a plan to meet some evolving budget challenges that have emerged over the past few years at SIU. These challenges in part were brought on by enrollment shifts, many of which we're aware of, increased investment in institutional aid to expand access and opportunity, along with heightened competition for new students, increasing instructional costs, and inflation and other factors. With that review, allow me to point us towards the future. The FY23 general operating budget, which has been developed to meet these challenges, including our ability to address the structural deficit in the general operating budget of about $18 million. In June, I made a presentation to the entire university community about the structure of our budget processes, and how we as a university community must work together to balance and realign the budget. In that presentation, I shared that SIUE has traditionally used what is referred to as a budget contingency as a part of the budget planning process. That contingency was sort of a mechanism to make short-term cuts that would balance the annual budget as a safety net. In other words, we would allocate resources to a unit at the beginning of the year, and then they'd be asked to hold a percentage of it to give back at the end of the year. In the context of SIUE's budget, the money was set aside to cover potential shortfalls that may occur during the fiscal year because of increased costs or lost revenue. The process was confusing to most, frustrating to others, but most importantly, it didn't really address the actual need for the contingency. This contingency had grown over the years. We started at 2%, right? And it has grown to 6.6% in FY22. This pattern suggested to me that an immediate change was needed. So while we're continuing a version of that contingency for this year, we're working in earnest to make long-term adjustments that would eliminate the need for such a budget process altogether. We now have a plan for FY23 to tackle some of the budget challenges facing the university. My plan is to work with members of our university community to reposition the university to have a budget that A, reflects our top priorities, and B, that will truly give the university a margin of excellence, which is really important to me. A couple of things that we're doing: we're working to reduce the dependency on tuition and state appropriations by diversifying revenue streams for greater resiliency and long-term security. We're modernizing our operational practices. We're ensuring that our overall academic offerings are not only student-centered, but also efficient, while remaining committed to excellence. And finally, we are right-sizing the scholarship budget while remaining committed to supporting institutional aid that makes a difference for our students. These efforts taken together will help reimagine the important work we do as a university and position SIUE for a strong financial future. According to our early projections, it is early still in this fiscal year, It is possible to close the $18 million gap in this budget year. My expectation is that we will end the year not only with a balanced budget, but also with reserves that meet the SIU system requirement. We have a plan with the new budget structure and process that establishes the groundwork for a firm financial foundation that can be built upon to advance SIUE's educational mission. We request approval of the FY23 budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? You know, I have a question, I guess, for Reverend Mahoney and Hanson Lane and Minor. All three came from different systems, different universities with different, you know, just because SIU has done the budgeting process the same way every year, it doesn't mean that if there's a better way to make this mousetrap better, we need to make changes in the way that we do our budgeting. Of course, I don't know whether, of course, a lot of it depends upon the state, but in terms of the how we allocate budget and how we prepare the budget, how does this compare with what you did at Winthrop and you did it in Texas, Austin, and you did in California? Is there any way that we can do this better, or are we doing it okay?
Well, I'll defer to President Mahoney.
Thanks, Chancellor.
And he is a money man. I mean,
I think there's lots of ways to do it. I think the general format is rather traditional and what I'm used to. I don't think there's anything unusual in how we're doing it. I think the question becomes, how do you look at it from a long-term standpoint? And I think both the chancellors are doing that right now. I mentioned earlier, we didn't get into a lot of details on it, but even the contract we now have with many of the unions is based on if we do better than expected, they do better than expected. And if we don't have the money for it, we're not going to give the same degree of rate. So we're actually kind of factoring that in to our budgets and our contracts with the unions, which I think is forward thinking. So I think with both the chancellors, and certainly with Dean Cruz as well, but he's been here a little longer than the rest of us have been, but I see very forward thinking in how they're looking at the budget. I will say too, I think it's one of the things, one of the institutions I was at was a responsibility center management budget institution, which means when I was a dean, I was responsible for my own costs, and I got revenue based on how many students I had. I will say for every school that says they have an RCM model, it's none of them are the same model. So there's lots of different ways of doing that. I think one of the questions probably both chancellors are thinking about is, do they want to work in some type of an incentive model, whether it's the degree that we had at Kent State or something else, where they're, again, you're shifting resources one way or another to the areas that are actually growing. And I think that's historically been a weakness for a lot of universities, is the budget stays the same regardless of what happens in each unit. And so, you know, and I think trying to move towards one where they would actually shift costs, however you do it. And there's lots of ways of doing it. I don't know if you all want to just.
Yeah.
There's one other element that I'd add. I think for most institutions there, if you pull the covers back, you find sort of wacky budget processes that may have made a lot of sense 17 years ago, and for some reason they're still in place. Now they conflict with something we put in place 12 years ago. And so I think when you have a system that you have the sort of additive model where you stack things on top, but you never go back and remove or sort of audit the policy environment, you can get really weird things. And so a number of the questions that I have asked my budget director and our team sort of, you know, why do we do this again? And people have to go to the archive to find out why we did that in the first place. I think being attentive to that, President Mahoney said it well, the sort of rollover budget model. We start with what we did last year, plus or minus based on the state appropriation, and the structure of the budget stays the same, even though the world around us is changing, right? And so I think that the key element there is how responsive institutional leaders can be in making changes that are responding to environmental factors, not only make those changes, but also survive making those changes, which I think is an important part of it. And that's why the communication element is so important, is to be able to articulate to a university community why you're making a change and why it's important for the future of the university.
President Mahoney, for you to be able to understand this and feel like you have your hands around it, I just did some quick math. Edwardsville budget's 311, the medical school's 285, Carbondale's 356. That's 952 million. That is a large enterprise. So next year it'll probably be $1 billion.
Yeah. Like
But you're
we'd like to get the
responsible for it.
revenues to $1 billion, not the
Yeah.
expenses.
Yeah. I'll
Yeah.
bet you if you do, the expenses will $1 billion.
Yeah, they will probably.
I got Rogers and John's attention and said, does this remind you of anything? Then the veterans here, that is the motto, as you just outlined, not to the penny, that Glenn Bouchard wanted to move toward. And of course, there were many, many changes, many factors, the reason we did not get to that point. But I think it's important, and I'll just stress this as a board, as President Mahoney and our two outstanding chancellors and dean, they try to move the institution to this new, I won't even say paradigm. It's critically important that the board support what you're trying to move toward. Not everybody's gonna like it. And they'll start making the calls and so on. So I just say it is critical that we, Mr. Chair, stay the course, get behind what our president is moving toward and get this done. This isn't the first time we've heard of this.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm sure, and like President Mahoney, if he sees changes in the model needs to be made, he's gonna make a recommendation to us. And draw upon his experience and experience of our wonderful chancellors. But we are gonna support you in whatever model you came up with. I do have a question though with regards to the professional schools. Jerry, do you get to keep the tuition from the medical school students?
It comes to us.
Pardon?
The medical school, the medical students' tuition comes to us.
Because I remember years ago, school used to keep, and correct me if I'm wrong, Blaine, but the law school used to keep its tuition, but now that doesn't happen. It goes into the general pot, and then the law school.
We have some that goes into the general but not.
But how about like the dental, this wonderful dental school that we just went through? I mean, do they, and the pharmacy school here at Edwardsville, do they get to keep the tuition, or does that go into a general pot and then comes back to them?
Yeah, it for us, it goes into a general pot. It's accounted for, right? But it comes centrally and then it's deployed to the unit.
Question for that. Sometime back you said IBH is coming up with something new formula. So have they decided and how different it would be?
They have not decided yet. It's state processes often are, they are not rapid.
So it won't be for next fiscal year.
No, not before next fiscal year, nor probably the fiscal year after that. So yeah, no, it's a 3-year process for the commission to come up with a model. We're in the, I think, second of those 3 years. Once we come up with a suggested model, we'll then go to the legislature and the fund really starts. And they will come up with that model. So that won't actually be an IBH decision, it will be a state legislative decision. But they will make a recommendation to the legislature, and the legislature created the commission. So again, they asked them to come up with a model. It will go to them and then they will come up with that. But that's it. We're probably at least a couple of years away from that. But yeah,
We've been very fortunate at the legislature and the governor have increased the education budget for not only us, but throughout the state. And we've been very fortunate in that regard, where other states are going the other way. And we've been blessed in that respect. So we're not in a position we were, 4, 5, 6 years ago, where we not only didn't get an increase, we got cut. So we've been blessed in that respect.
And I will say what you described a little bit with the law and pharmacy and dental would be kind of what it sometimes happens in a traditional RCM model. But I'm not saying necessarily that's necessarily the best thing. It was funny, we looked at that when I was at one institution and the deans immediately rejected it because they realized if they didn't hit their enrollment targets, they got cuts directly and they had to manage them and they didn't want to be part of that. So sometimes it's kind of, I would say, an RCM light model where at the chancellor's level and his staff is looking at what's happening and shifting resources from that maybe because it allows you to help schools through that kind of downturn a little bit and not have them really struggle the way some did. And I will say that happened for us where we had the RCM model at Kent State. Some of the schools really were struggling badly and the model didn't really help them very much to deal with that. And so it caused some negative results from it. So it's got good sides and bad sides to it.
Yep.
I just have a question for Dr. Hightower. You recall years ago, I think it was this conversation that started the ball on a programming evaluation.
Yes,
and we
that
cut some
was,
programming.
that was all part of it.
Yeah,
That was
so
all part of it.
it was kind of interesting because those were the right moves to make, but man,
That's why I made the statement that we just need to get behind the president, because whatever you come up with, you can take it to the bank. There's going to be a lot of undermine, a lot of calls and all. And we've got a judge right here that will rule in our favor. Right.
And likewise, I would say I support the chancellors and what they're doing. We talk about it on a regular basis. And so it's some of the decisions, frankly, are better made at their level than at mine. But I'm happy to be part of that discussion.
Yes,
And I have been with both.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
so-
yes, exactly.
thank you.
Any other questions of Dr. Mahoney or Chancellor Lane or Minor about the budget? I think they've done an outstanding job and I think we three, know that you have the support of the board going forward. Okay. All right, the next, we will close the meeting, go into executive session. I move to close the meeting to the public for the purpose of considering pending, probable, or imminent court proceedings against or on behalf of the board, appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees, and review of executive session minutes. The relevant sections of the Open Meetings Act statute that allow for the closed session are 5 ILCS 120/2, C, 1, 11, and 21. Do I have a second to the motion?
Second.
And seconded by Trustee Simmons. Ms. Keith, please call the roll.
Brew,
Yes.
Curtis, Gilbert,
Yes.
Hightower,
Yes.
Odell. Yes. Salger. Yes. Sharma,
Yes.
Simmons,
Yes.
Tedrick.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passes and we will now move into executive session, which will be